we're talking today about what does it mean to be trauma informed, and how should, I guess, from a therapist perspective, how should we work with trauma? What do people need to know about working with trauma? I just wondered if you had any thoughts about that.
Yeah, so on a very basic level, being trauma informed really recognises how pervasive traumatic incidents are within the human experience. Trauma informed training provides you with a heightened awareness of the psychological impact and how that can present in day-to-day scenarios. And it provides a way to work with clients in an empowered way and in a way that avoids any future harm. And the general aim would be to help clients kind of process their feelings about traumatic events, work with them in terms of their self-esteem to rebuild their relational worth, and restore autonomy that might have been robbed from them, and their self-efficacy, and to obviously encourage post-traumatic growth.
Mm.
And in terms of how to work in a trauma-informed way, I suppose that awareness of trauma is just so important. It allows me to identify any kind of subtle trauma indicators, which can enable me to provide more targeted and support and interventions. Safety for the client is key. Obviously, a therapeutic relationship between the client and the therapist is so important, but when it comes to trauma-informed care, it's just so much more important. It is the real kind of cornerstone. So I work in a way to establish a safe and supportive environment where the client feels respected and understood at all times. Again, as I kind of mentioned earlier, client empowerment is really so important. And again, I work in a way to encourage the client's autonomy, reinforcing their strengths and their own personal control in their own healing journey. And again, avoiding that re-traumatization is so key as well. So it's about adopting that sensitive approach which prevents triggering or exacerbating any past trauma, and working within a client's window of tolerance, which is again so key and central to working in a trauma-informed way. Personally, I always feel it kind of requires that foundation of collaboration and choice. So I work with clients in a kind of respectful and collaborative way that kind of encourages that mutual kind of effort.
Yeah, and it's really interesting, like, because a number of the things you mentioned there, empowering people, keeping their autonomy with them, and working in sort of collaboration, I think is so important, because I think without realizing it, a lot of people, and I'm thinking lawyers now, and what you've highlighted is what we need to be really careful about as therapists, is keeping the autonomy with the clients rather than sort of stepping in to fix, to reassure, to that they're there, calm down, all of that kind of stuff that out there in the outside world people do all the time. And as lawyers, we talk about trauma-informed law as well. Lawyers can often fall into that trap when working with people who are traumatized, because we're empathetic, we do want to make it better, and we want to reassure. But as you say, actually, the delicacy of the work that you do is about keeping the power with that person and helping them to find the tools and the resources within themselves. Yeah, which is just really sort of powerful. And I imagine with the sort of work that you've worked on over the years, we've talked about working with victims of sexual violence and that kind of thing. Like, this is absolutely crucial.
And I think it also highlights how therapy is very different to any other conversation you'll ever have in your life. It's so different to even the therapy you might get from friends on a night out. It's very, very different. And even just having that space that is solely for you to explore things, but with the support and the kind of safety that you need to actually do that, it's just so pivotal for those who have survived any sort of trauma.
Yeah, that quality of attention, that you give someone, it's absolutely powerful, isn't it? As you say, in a world where there are often people telling you what you should do, or it can be really quite unhelpful to have someone telling you what you should do, and actually having someone there who can sort of walk alongside you. I sometimes think the role of a therapist is a bit like a sort of curious detective, in a way, of like just looking at things alongside you and go, hey, look at this is interesting, without judgment, and walking alongside you and helping you to find kind of your way through it. So in terms of how therapists work with trauma, I think you said it all, in terms of your approach to things and that kind of delicacy of approach.
Yeah, and I think you put it beautifully in terms of that kind of detective analogy, because I feel that since embarking on my therapeutic kind of journey, so to speak, that I've become more curious and less judgmental about
Mm.
it. So you even feel that when bad things happen, you are more curious about what is behind that and what it might mean. And again, I think that kind of curiosity is just so key to actually being a good therapist and actually knowing kind of how to challenge when appropriate, and what to kind of keep an eye on as you kind of go forward. But again, allowing the client at all times to kind of lead the way.
Yeah, absolutely. That kind of, I think therapy is funny because it can look like you're not doing very much quite a lot of the time, but your brain's going all over and your body, you're in touch with your feelings and your body and your brain, and you're sort of noticing things as you go and just sort of marking it and going, oh, leave that there. And there may be an intervention at a certain point, but it doesn't need to be now. And,
Yeah.
just sort of seeing where it goes. It's a curious job, isn't it?
And I think that's actually where like the kind of previous lawyer in me really just kind of comes to the fore, because you are literally analysing every word that's said, you're storing it in files for later, like you're literally kind of helping them solve the puzzle in the background, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And when a puzzle is solved, if that doesn't sound too sort of crass or too simplistic, occasionally when you see those shifts with clients, it often it doesn't come through a sort of effort of will. It can feel like it comes from nowhere and there's a sudden shift, and it's an amazing sort of thing to be a part of, and it's sort of almost comes from the energy between you rather than it being, oh, I'm such a good therapist, I've achieved this, or it's a really interesting thing to be a part of. It's a privilege, really, isn't it, as you said
Yeah.
it.
It's
um
possibly so humbling, and it's so beautiful when people feel comfortable enough to share their stories. And it's just such a privilege, as you've said, to like actually watch someone like solve the puzzle on their own while
mm.
you're there kind of in the background, kind of helping them along and being supportive along the way. And it's just feel beautiful to see how people can completely change and grow. And it's just the best job in the world.
Yeah, it is, isn't it?